Cindy, come on up.
Yeah. Get us shorties in front.
Thank you. Thank you, Blue.
Well, thank you all for coming. I'm going to talk very briefly, and then my colleagues, whoever want to say something can. When I'm done, we will take questions. If you direct the questions to me, I will either answer it or designate to someone, or you may choose a senator to ask questions to. So with that, I will open by telling you that the people of Israel have suffered a terrorist attack that many are equating to our own September 11th. Mass gunmen, entire families in their homes, massacred babies and the elderly, and dragged hostages across the border into Gaza. We saw a lot of it in the film, on TV, and otherwise. These attacks are premeditated, brutal, and horrific, and will long live in the memory of those of us who support the Israeli people. Our message to the Israeli people is clear. We stand with you, and we will do all that we can to ensure you can rebuild, defend your land and people, and ensure that Hamas can never, ever do something like this again. This is different than the previous incursions. Almost immediately after the attacks, we saw misguided and dangerous calls for a ceasefire and mediation. These harmful messages failed to recognize Israel's legitimate right to protect its people. You can't mediate with terror organizations. You have to go to the source and eliminate it, which I know the Israelis are working to do. They do war like we do war, not like terrorists do war, and they are very sensitive to damage to civilians. Hamas is merely an arm of the Iranian regime. Iran pulled the trigger on October 7th, and there are other Iranian proxies in the region that have long sought to pursue the type of attack and carnage that we saw that day. These people hate Israel and the Jewish people, but they also hate the United States of America and the American people. The administration can no longer wish away the Iranian threat or attempt to appease the Iranians as they have. The attacks in Israel and recurring attacks against our partners, troops, and diplomats are proof of a failed Iran policy. And we must change course quickly before more damage is done by the Iranian regime. With that, I want to recognize Senator Wicker for a few remarks.
Thank you, Senator Risch, and we'll all be brief because I know you may have questions. Let's make this very clear. Hamas does not want the people of Gaza to live side by side with their Israeli fellow humans in peace. That is not the goal of Hamas. The stated written goal in black and white of the Hamas charter is the destruction of the Jewish race and the complete removal off the face of the map of the Israeli state. That is what Hamas wants. We stand for what Israel has stood for now for 7.5 decades, a place where finally the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob can live in a place where they're safe and peaceful alongside people of different ethnic origins, just as people all the way around the world are asked to do. Hamas's goal is the removal and death of every Israeli and every Jew. Let's remember that. And let's remember two things. They are the client state of the Islamic government in Iran. And until we realize that, until our federal policy is toughness, American strength, peace through strength, with regard to the people of Iran and the Islamic leaders of Iran, we will not have peace in the Middle East. So we stand with our friends. We reject the false narrative that has entered the minds of so-called educated people over the last decade, 2 decades, that somehow the Israeli people are at fault in this regard. The terrorists are Hamas. The terrorists are their brothers and sisters in arms, Hezbollah, and other Islamic terrorist groups. The terrorist attack was visited upon the innocent civilians of Israel. We stand with them, and Republicans, Democrats, and independents, House and Senate, will be standing forward today to make it clear that the United States of America stands with the nation of Israel.
Thank you. Senator Barrasso.
Well, you heard it. America stands with Israel. They're under attack by purely evil Hamas terrorists. Thousands are dead, including Americans. The atrocities are horrific. Israel's taking action right now to defend itself and its people. America cannot let Israel stand alone. That means getting Israel the weapons and the military assistance that they need: Iron Dome interceptors, precision-guided missiles, protective equipment, and intelligence support. We're committed to ensuring that Israel can fight against all terrorist threats and protect their people. This morning we had the opportunity in the Foreign Relations Committee to question Jack Lew, who is President Biden's nominee to be the ambassador to Israel from the United States. Now, don't forget, Jack Lew, he negotiated Obama's terrible Iran deal. As Secretary of Treasury, he sent pallets of cash to Iran. Under the lenient Biden administration, Iran has been able to export $80 billion worth of oil. They sold much of it to China. At the same time, the administration strangles American oil and gas production. This administration's appeasement strategy towards Iran has enabled Iran to fund Hamas and Hezbollah in their attacks on Israel. And I say all of this because Jack Lew is part of the problem, and as a result, I oppose his nomination. We have a capable charge d'affaires who is right at the embassy right now. Stephanie Hallett is a professional foreign service agent, officer, spent an entire career in the region, knows the people, knows the region. The president should nominate her to be ambassador. She could be confirmed quickly. America the support for Israel is unwavering. The message needs to be clear from the president, from his ambassador, and from the people, all of us serving in Congress today.
Thank you. Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Senator Risch. And I just returned a number of days ago from a bipartisan delegation that I led to the Middle East. And there should be no question that the United States will stand and does stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel. We know that Iran is behind this extreme terrorism, and it has been fueled and funded by Biden's appeasement strategy in the Middle East. Just as my colleagues have outlined, we have seen $80 billion that has gone into the pockets of Iran. And Iran continues to fund all of these terrorist proxies. 93% of the funding that goes to Hamas comes from Iran. 100% of the funding that goes to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad comes from Iran. Iran also funds Hezbollah and the Houthis. So we see a trend in the chaotic Middle East. I'm holding the Biden administration accountable to actually enforce the laws that are on the books. We have sanctions against Iran. They must be enforced. We need to take away the money that is going into the hands of Iran, which fuels these terrorist proxies through the region. They are savages, and we have seen what they have done to our friends in Israel. To support Israel, we must defund these terrorists who perpetuated this heinous attack against Israel.
Thank you. Senator Hagan.
Thank you. My colleagues have done a good job of pointing the finger to the true culprit here. It's unfortunate that President Joe Biden will not do so. He's in Israel. None of his remarks pointed to the fact that Iran is behind this, the world's greatest sponsor of terror. If you look at what happened during the Trump administration, we imposed a maximum pressure campaign on Iran. We brought the flow of funds to Iran down to a trickle. What happened? In 2021, Joe Biden was confirmed to be president. Joe Biden then implemented a new policy toward Iran, a policy of appeasement, setting aside the maximum pressure campaign of President Trump. And what we've seen then is a dramatic ramp-up of revenues. Joe Biden put in place a special envoy, Robert Malley. Robert Malley has now had his security clearance stripped. He's been dismissed from the State Department, and he is under federal investigation. This is the person that was in charge of negotiating with Iran. This was the person that was in charge of the non-enforcement of sanctions. This was the person that oversaw the Biden administration's failure to enforce the sanctions that so greatly enriched Iran. If you look back to the Trump administration, by 2020, we had reduced Iran's revenues to below $8 billion. It was widely reported in the media that both Hezbollah and Hamas were going broke. Once Joe Biden comes into office, once Rob Malley takes his post, we see the Iranian regime enriched beyond comprehension. We see the violence coming from Gaza in 2021 in the 11-day war against Israel. And now we've seen the most horrific act yet. Iran's fingerprints are all over this. The Biden administration needs to wake up and accept responsibility in this policy of appeasement. and bring civility back to the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Risch. I think you're going to see a common theme here, but I want to emphasize what Senator Hagerty just mentioned: appeasement and accommodation of Iran, which has been the policies of the Obama administration and the Biden administration, has been a failure and hugely destabilizing throughout the Middle East. This policy has demoralized our allies, not just the Israelis, but the Gulf Arab states, Egypt. It has emboldened Iran. It has put billions of dollars in the coffers of terrorist proxies, and it has put the lives of Americans and our allies, like Israel, at extreme risk, and it has shattered deterrence. All you have to do is look at what's going on in the region right now. As Senator Hagerty mentioned, the Trump administration did something that's really hard to do. It reestablished deterrence in the region with regard to Iran. How did it do this? Maximum pressure campaign in terms of oil, but other areas like ballistic missiles. It launched a peace process with regard to the Abraham Accords and normalization with Israel, which Iran hated. And of course, it was not afraid to take out terrorist leaders like Soleimani, which the previous administration did. As is already mentioned, the Biden administration on day one moved to loosen and reverse this tough strategy against Iran. What has it gotten us? We're seeing what it's gotten us. And think about this. It's not just this $6 billion ransom that they were negotiating. Literally, as the Iranians and Hezbollah and Hamas were planning the biggest slaughter of the Jewish people since the Holocaust, it is the oil that's been put on international markets. It's foreign currency reserves. At the end of the Trump administration, Iran had $4 billion in foreign currency reserves. They now have 80. So this policy, if there's one thing that's going to come out of this, it has to happen now. The Biden administration's appeasement policy of Iran has to stop.
Senator Hoeven.
Thanks, Senator Risch. Thanks for putting together this press conference and for your leadership on foreign affairs. For those of you that know Senator Risch, you know he's very much to the point. He's a person who, you know, doesn't give big, long speeches. He gets to it. And this is a great example. This is about showing unity in support of Israel. And that has to be the message. You're going to hear that from every one of us. I believe that you're going to hear that from every member of our caucus. This is about unity in support for Israel. What Hamas did, atrocious doesn't even begin to explain it. Horrific. It's beyond belief. Killing indiscriminately. Taking hostages. Imagine if that was your family member. Unprovoked attack, doing that. Just sit and think for a minute if it was your family. It's unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. So we have to stand with Israel. We need to help Israel. And that means whatever it may take to help them, whether it's obviously weapons, the financial support, special operators as we work to bring our hostages back. But at the end of the day, they have to defeat Hamas. It's not just about stopping Hamas this time. We can't have this happen again. This can't happen over and over. They need to be stopped. The world community needs to come together and say, this is not acceptable. This needs to stop. And it's really important that we understand a couple of things. One, Iran is behind this. And we need to quit kind of parsing words on this. Iran is behind Hamas. Iran is behind Hezbollah. That's how they get armed. That's how they get trained. That's the reality. So let's face that hard, cold reality and put maximum pressure on Iran. That means severe sanctions without waivers. They are the largest sponsor, the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. That's where the funding's coming from. That's where the resources, that's where the training, the equipment, that's where it's coming from. We need to recognize it, and not just the United States, but the world community needs to say, enough, we're stopping that right now. Severe sanctions without waivers. And the other thing is, we got to see it through. It's not enough to say that we're standing here today unified and supporting Israel. We must see it through. And we know there are tough days ahead. And we cannot waver. We must be clear-eyed. We must see it through. This cannot continue to happen in the future. Hamas must be stopped, not just this time, but so that there is not a repeat of this terrible atrocity.
Thanks, Senator Scott.
In Florida, we've got a lot of individuals that have family members in Israel, and we have a lot of people in our state that came from Israel. I've had a lot of trips to Israel. Yesterday, I talked to a lady that worked at a kibbutz that I had the opportunity to visit on one of my trips back in 2019. She's only alive because she was not there. I asked her what happened. She said the people on my left, the house on my left, the house on my right, almost every house on the street, everybody was shot at gunpoint. She said her sister was in a secure shelter, and she was talking to them, and Hamas was trying to break in. She said kids watch their parents be shot, and they've been kidnapped into Gaza. She said she's seen the pictures of babies mutilated from her village. She'll never be able to go back to her village. She's lost everything. So we're only up here talking because Iran backed Hamas and did all this, because they hate Jews. They hate Jews, they hate Israel, they hate America, they hate Americans. That's why we're here. 31 Americans are dead. We don't know how many Americans are held hostage. 1,400 Israeli Americans and Europeans are dead. They're dead. I want to make sure Iran gets held accountable and Hamas gets held accountable. Hamas needs to be destroyed. Every member of Hamas needs to be murdered, killed. They need to be dead, what they did. So, as you've heard, we have a president that appeases Iran. So if you look at some of the pictures and some of the videos about the attack, what they have? They had humanitarian aid, first aid kits that Hamas is using. If you look at Israeli TV, you see a whole bunch of pictures of rice bags with bullets in it to go to Hamas. So this is our money going to Hamas. That's exactly what it is. So today, President Biden announced $100 million more money aid for Gaza and the West Bank. That's our money. As we go, while they're holding Americans. They're holding Americans, and we're going to give them money. I mean, would you do that? Who would do that? Who would give someone, they're holding your family hostage, they've killed your family, and we give them money? This is crazy. So I've got a bill. I'm going to do a UC this afternoon, Stop Taxpayer Funding the Hamas Act. It's going to stop this. And I wish we had a president that understood this appeasement doesn't work and started talking about the 31 Americans that died and the unbelievable number of Americans that are still being held hostage. What in the hell is he doing to get them back? Why would we spend a minute of our time and clearly none of our money to figure out how to get more aid to Gaza to help terrorists? This makes no sense.
Thank you. Senator Marshall.
Thank you. Over the last several days, as I've contemplated the next weeks and months that lie ahead of us, and yes, it's going to be weeks or months, I'm reminded of the words of my boyhood hero, the 34th President of the United States, when President Eisenhower talked about war. I said that I hate war as only a soldier who's lived it can, as one who's seen its brutality, its futility, and its stupidity. I just want to warn Americans that when this war, this invasion of the Gaza Strip starts, it's not going to be pretty. There are no good photos that are going to come out of this war. But what Americans need to remember, that the blood they're seeing belongs on the hands of Iran and Hamas. They're the ones that have caused this. These are the ones that are hiding behind innocent women and children. As we go forward, what we need to see out of the White House is a very clear vision, a very clear mission. Number one, we need to be focused on getting American hostages and citizens back safely. And every day this president wastes, we have hostages that are being beaten by terrorists from Hamas. Next, number two, we need to cut the head off the snake, and Iran is the snake, and let all the puppets, all the terrorist organizations know if they engage that there will indeed be hell to pay. And lastly, Israel needs to know that we will stand beside you no matter, not if, but what. We will stand beside you no matter what. That as these days get tougher and we see death and destruction, that we're going to stand beside you knowing that the blood being shed belongs on the hands of Iran and Hamas. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Ricketts.
I want to reiterate what my colleagues have already said. We stand with Israel. We must continue to stand alongside them as they take on this war to destroy Hamas. Hamas has committed unspeakable acts of terror that have already been described. And Israel has not only the right, but the responsibility to defend itself. And we need to make sure Israel has the resources to do that. We also need to make sure that we know that this was brought upon Hamas by their actions. And when we talk about responsibility, should any harm fall to any American hostages in Gaza, that is solely on the responsibility of Hamas. They are the ones that took the hostages. Any harm that comes to Americans that they are holding, that's on them. We need to remember that. And again, these calls to de-escalate or for a ceasefire, those are foolishness. This war has to be prosecuted till Hamas is destroyed. And we should not provide any resources to Hamas or Gaza until that is done. We didn't rebuild Europe until after Nazi Germany had been defeated. And that is the way this should be done now. You don't provide your enemies resources. So the president's humanitarian aid, again, is misguided. We need to make sure that Israel has the resources to win this war. We cannot be supplying the enemy. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you. I have on my Jerusalem cross today. I put it on early morning of October the 7th. The most important thing we can do is pray for Israel and the people of Israel, but we've got to put feet to those prayers. We cannot stop there. We've got to take action. It is amazing of the capabilities that the United States has when we go in to defend. I'm afraid that Hamas has taken advantage because they've been emboldened by President Biden's weak policies. In Afghanistan, the decision to unfreeze $6 billion of Iranian oil revenue. I will support those policies that shore up Israel's security. And as Senator Katie Britt said yesterday, we've got to look evil in the eye and take it out. As the Jewish state works to secure its borders, we need to be securing our own borders. With the destruction that has happened in Israel, our thoughts have to be on protecting our country, but to help Israel protect the state of Israel. Again, my prayers are with Israelis, the state of Israel, and I ask the American people to pray with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Langford.
So 50 years after the Yom Kippur War, and right at the moment when all of the normalization conversation was happening between Saudi Arabia and Israel is at its peak, that's when Hamas decides to attack. Literally, we have the Abraham Accords moving now with Morocco, with UAE and Bahrain, continued engagement there, normalization in the region, and Hamas determines that this is against their self-interests, and they literally slaughter 1,400 individuals to try to deter all of that dialogue. We not only stand with Israel, but we stand with the civilized world that would say this kind of brutality, simply because someone is Jewish, is not only heinous and horrible, but should be deplorable to everyone in the world, regardless of your faith, background, community, or country that you're from. We're speaking out not only for Israel and its right to be able to defend themselves, but we're also speaking out for truth and for facts. 24 hours ago, a hospital was hit in Gaza. Around 500 civilians lost their lives senselessly, and immediately Hamas and nations around the region announced that it was Israel as an airstrike that killed all those individuals. The meetings with Biden were canceled because of that. But now as the facts come out, and as we've been able to note and to be able to show authoritatively, that was actually a misguided rocket shot from inside Gaza towards civilians in Israel that actually hit civilians in Gaza. That was not an Israeli airstrike. I would call on all of the nations around the world that called out Israel for that strike to immediately change their statement and to be able to call out Hamas for that strike against that hospital, and to be able to let their own people know this is what is happening with these heinous acts of terrorism and with the violence that Hamas is actually bringing. And one last comment. While we're saddened and grieved and overwhelmed by 31 Americans that have died and 1,400 Israelis and countless number of civilians in the area, we also should be keenly aware that 9/11 occurred with 20 individuals in the United States that were illegally present in the United States that we did not account for, and they carried out those heinous acts of terrorism here. In the past 2 years, on our southern border, 70,000 individuals have crossed and been released into our country that were identified by DHS as what they call special interest aliens. These are high-risk individuals coming from Iran, from Iraq, from Syria, and other nations. They've crossed our southern border and been released into the United States, awaiting their hearing. We have no idea where they are. 70,000. These are individuals that came between the ports of entry and got into our country even after their identification as a special interest alien. The Biden administration needs to take seriously not only what's happening in Israel, and we are glad to be able to stand alongside our ally Israel, but we should take seriously the lessons that should have been learned from 9/11 for our own border, that we will not have an insecure border that is ignored from the real threats that are coming across. This administration needs to shut down that border and needs to be able to pursue all those special interest aliens currently in our country, to have them not currently roaming free in our nation.
Thank you. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman Risch. Hamas's cold-blooded attack last week, it was loathsome and it was obscene. And what we see when we look at terror of that proportion, we have to have a response. Israel has to have a response. We stand with Israel. They have the right and they have the responsibility to do what needs to be done. They have to defend themselves, and we are there to offer them assistance. We need to provide the Israeli government with support that it needs to defend its own territory and to defend its people. And this will allow Israel the resources to make difficult decisions that it's going to have to make in the days and the weeks and the months ahead. The really difficult decisions that Israel has to make because they're a sovereign nation. We know that Israel will need more defense capabilities. They will need interceptors for the Iron Dome. We know that Israel will also need more offense capabilities like precision-guided munitions. And we know that Israel is going to need medical equipment to help their troops, to help their citizens, to help them recover from these vicious attacks by Hamas, who is backed by Iran. The United States and Israel have long partnered and have a special relationship. We share intelligence with the Israelis on terrorism that happens in the Middle East. And that must continue. That must continue because it's vital to protect our country as well. This is not just an Israeli problem. This is not just an attack on Israel. This is an attack on America. This is an attack on the civilized world. We need to stand with Israel, and we need to be clear in our message that we do, and we are there to provide them with what they need so that they can fight the fight that has to happen.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cornyn.
In the days following this terrorist attack on Israel, I met with two women at the Temple Emmanuel in Dallas, Texas, a synagogue, where Kim told me about her two sons, both of whom were born in Dallas, American citizens, Texans, but who are now fighting with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. And she was terrified in her own right, wondering whether they would be safe or whether they would be killed as a result of their military service. Another woman was a teacher at a kibbutz who said that who'd recently moved to Dallas. She recounted her phone just buzzing constantly with messages from people who were being attacked by Hamas as those attacks took place. And you can imagine her emotions, her fear, as a result of not being able to do anything about it, but knowing that her friends and loved ones were being murdered as those messages were being read. I think the administration is reaping what it sows. What I mean by that is Ronald Reagan famously said, peace is through strength. If Iran and Hamas had been afraid of what the response would be, they never would have made the attack in the first place. But please remember, Iran has killed Americans over the last 3 decades in Iraq by providing explosively formed penetrators, by sponsoring Hamas and Hezbollah, which, as you know, are terrorist organizations designated by the United States government. Iran provides them $100 million a year. So this idea that Iran doesn't know or wasn't complicit in this attack is completely implausible, unbelievable. And here's the worst part. The Biden administration continues to appease the Iranian regime, which, as we know, has been under sanctions by the United States government as part of this maximum pressure campaign to get them, to discourage them from developing nuclear weapons. Well, the Biden administration has stood by as the regime has continued to enrich uranium, getting closer and closer to that day it will have a nuclear weapon, just as they've not enforced the sanctions which have allowed the regime to reap the economic rewards of selling its oil on the open market. So, as horrible as this is, it is horrible. It's absolutely critical that the administration change course, quit its appeasement, quit trying to play nice when it comes to people who you can't reason with. And I'm not just talking about Hamas. I'm talking about the regime in Iran that is the puppet master for what Hamas did against innocent civilians on October the 7th.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you all for sticking it out as you have. To put a fine point on this, the Foreign Relations Committee put out a resolution in support of Israel, and that resolution has 99 sponsors and co-sponsors of the resolution. So in this town of polarity, if you would, we've come together as a Senate to support Israel. So with that, looks like I will be taking questions. He had his hand up first. Go ahead. First of all, as to Iran's part in this, look, I've been on the Intelligence Committee and Foreign Relations Committee for 15 years. If I heard nothing else about this other than what happened, I would say that the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming that Iran did this. Without Iran, the terrorist organizations are impotent. They can do nothing. They don't have money. They don't have the intelligence. They don't have anything to do it. So Hamas would be nothing without Iran. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal, I believe, with people of direct evidence of people who said they were at the table, heard the planning, gave the dates, the times, the places, and everything else. What the administration has said is they have no information to corroborate that. What the administration ought to be saying is we have no evidence to contradict what these people are saying. That's the way you do it in a court of law. I think the administration is tippy-toeing here to avoid a direct confrontation with Iran. We do not want a confrontation with Iran. I suspect they don't want a confrontation with us. It's important we get down the road and see that that doesn't happen, and we don't have more spread in the region. Good questions. You know, I haven't talked with Chairman McCall about that. I'm going to pass on that for right now, but I'll look into that. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not going to comment on the exact facts of what's going on. Indeed, I can't. But let me say, every American wants the Americans home. That is a high priority. But remember, it's not America that's responsible for this, and it's not Israel that's responsible for this. Somebody ought to ask Hamas that question and say, what are you doing about the hostages? Because they have the hostages in their custody. They took them. They're responsible for them, and only they can answer the questions that you would have about the hostages.
And Hamas says that they will release the hostages if there is no action taken against them.
There should not be any if on that. They should release the hostages, period. Okay, you were quick here. Yeah, I'm going to leave that to leadership. They are going, I'm told that there's a package coming from leadership on national security issues, and it isn't just on this. We all know the world is burning right now. There's things going on in a lot of different places. There's a lot of things that need attention. A huge national security issue, and nobody ever puts it in these terms, or very few people do. That is our southern border is a national security issue. So this package is going to include a lot of national security issues. It has not been negotiated. I'm told it's coming in its raw form. As with everything around here, it's going to need some negotiation. That's where I leave it. You were next here. Right. That answer to that question is no. But the overall issue that you raise is really, really important here. I believe that what struck the match on this was the fact that things have changed in the Middle East in recent years. The Abraham Accords have been a tremendous success. I think they're going to continue to be a tremendous success. Obviously, it's going to be paused now as these things are happening. You've all seen in open source, which I can't comment on the details of, that Israel and Saudi were talking with the help of the United States to reach normality. This is something Iran could not stand. If there is, and I think there will be eventually, normality between Israel and Saudi Arabia, this is going to put Iran on an island, and they can't stand that. And I really believe that's why they pulled the cricket. I'm sorry. Yeah, Look, they have said publicly, I have talked with them, with the Saudis since then. I'm going to meet some more. I really believe that they are anxious to get to that point, to where you have normalization of relations. I met with, as you pointed out, I met with the Crown Prince earlier this year. We discussed that topic at length. I come away from there with a very distinct feeling that Saudi would very much like to do this. Obviously, the Persians, the Iranians, are using Arab allies, namely Hamas and PIJ and Hezbollah, as their agents to foment this. There is no question about it. And they're going to figure this out. They already have figured this out, other countries, over the years, and that's why the Abraham Accords came to be at the outset. You recall the Palestinians were absolutely dead set against those Arab countries entering into normalization with Israel. I think this is going to continue. I think in the long game, I think this is a historical act that has occurred. It's going to flow into history. But I think as we go forward, the progress that's been made in the Middle East, particularly as I talk to other countries in the Middle East since this has started, I believe it's going to go on. In the long haul, I think that I think the Iranians are going to be put on the island that they don't want to be put on. All right, back here. Yeah, well, if you were at that hearing this morning, you saw that we have real problems with Jack Lew. Look, the purpose right now is to support Israel. And I believe that the right vote in supporting Israel is not to have Jack Lew as going in there as the ambassador. I suspect he's going to get confirmed on a party line vote. We all want to do what's right for Israel. If that happens, of course, we'll work with Jack Lew in the position if he gets into that position. You heard the reasons we had against it. I believe that the best you can say about it is that he misled Congress badly in operation of the JCPOA and indeed assisted Iran in accessing the U.S. financial system when he had promised us, sitting in the same chair, that he would not do that. Big problem. Big problem. So, look, there's a lot of people that can do this job. Advice and consent of the Senate. My advice is I'd like to see somebody else there. When it comes to the consent, we'll see how it turns out. Yeah. I do. Thank you. No, I can't hear. No, we have a very clear understanding of that, and that's been from the moment this started, that those wheels went in motion to get an understanding of what it takes. Because you've heard, I mean, this commitment and this support by the U.S. Senate, and I'm certain by the House too when they get to it, is incredibly strong, and we're going to help. We're going to help. A little louder, I'm sorry. You know, I have a really good answer to that question. This is my 43rd year in a Senate, 28 of them at the state, 15 here, and I led a Senate for 20 years. And I didn't learn everything, but one thing I learned that it's absolutely crystal clear. The last thing a House of Representatives need is a Senate telling them what they think should happen and advising them in that regard. They'll get through this, and they'll figure it out themselves. We all want to get there. Everybody wants to get there. They'll get it done. Mm-hmm. You know, I can't hear. The acoustics in this room are horrible. But you know, why don't you come on up here? The echo, there's a real echo in here, and I'm just not picking up. I heard somebody is claiming something about something, and They're protesting where? What are you guys doing here? No, we're not going to do that. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to aid Israel. We are all in with Israel. Look, you heard what was said in this room about what these terrorists did to these people. They have the right to defend themselves. They're our friends. They're our allies. One of the closest allies we have in the room. We are going to stick with them. Hardcore, period, full stop. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're in discussions on that. Look, it's one thing to be a no; it's another thing to block the inevitable. We'll get through this and get through it one way or another. We're going to get through this very quickly. Thank you. Good question. Are we good? Thank you all. Thanks for coming.